headed by a detachment of cavalry in advance of 3 grooms on horseback in gala livery. The state coach of the privy councillors and chamberlains was followed by a second state carriage drawn by 6 horses, containing the ambassador's secretary, with his master of the ceremonies and the steward of the court. Liveried footmen, running grooms, and the Grand Marshal's lackeys followed in the liveries of the ambassador of France. Then appeared 6 horses drawing the state carriage of the ambassador and Grand Marshal, attended by 2 of the Empress footmen in gala livery at the doors, together with 3 major dormos of the palace mounted, and the ambassador's equerry and aides de camp. Then followed by 2 outriders, with the second equerry of the ambassador, after which 3 carriages, each drawn by 6 horses, followed one another, containing the officials, cavaliers of the embassy, with officers of the ambassador's household, attended by outriders. The procession terminated with a detachment of cavalry. After his reception by the Prince of Zinzendorf, the ambassador, accompanied by the Grand Marshal, entered the palace, followed by his entire household, and passed between the ranks of grenadiers, palace guards, musketeers, and the Hungarian guard of nobles. His flunkies he left in the Traben Hall, the officers of his household in the Hall of the Gentlemen, and the embassy officials between the 2 first columns of the great new hall. On finding himself in the presence of the emperor, who stood beneath a canopy with his head covered, Berthier bared his head, bowing 3 times. The emperor did not uncover until after the first salutation, and replaced his hat immediately. The ambassador delivered his speech with his head covered, but removed its covering each time he pronounced the name of one of the 2 sovereigns, and whenever the name of the Emperor Napoleon was mentioned, the Emperor Francis saluted. The Empress of the Revolution was seen at the grand banquet, which took place in the Empress's apartments, when, for the first time, the humble folk, not accredited with 32 quarterings, were admitted and received at the costume ball which followed the repast. And in the salons of the Imperial Redoubt, 6,000 persons were present, some, like Prince Esterhazy, covered with diamonds. Le Jeune, one of Berthier's gentlemen, challenged Esterhazy to the first duel, and Esterhazy promised him to wear this dress. What amenities! On March 8th, the suite was preferred. In his speech to the Emperor Francis, Berthier remarked, "The eminent qualities for which this princess is distinguished have destined her for a place upon a great throne. She will thus ensure the happiness of a great people and that of a great man." To which the Austrian simply replied, "I grant the hand of my daughter to the Emperor of the French." The Archduchess, accompanied by her Grand Mistress and Grand Master, was thereupon presented by the Grand Chamberlain, having approached her father with a deep curtsy and bowed to the ambassador. She took her seat on the Emperor's left. Berthier made another speech as he handed the portrait of Napoleon to the Archduchess, meanwhile holding a letter in his hand. "This is the letter. Madame, sir, the success of the suite that I have preferred to His Majesty the Emperor, your father, to unite myself with you in marriage is a very precious indication of the esteem and consideration he bestows on me. I am deeply touched by the consent that you on your part give to a union that consummates for me the greatest joy, and which should adorn my whole life. I have charged the Prince of Neuchatel, my ambassador extraordinary and plenipotentiary, to deliver to you my portrait. I beg you to receive it as a gauge of the sentiments which are graven on my heart, and which will be unalterable. To the phrase, 'It is above all from your heart, Madame, that the Emperor, my master, desires to obtain you,' Marie Louise replied, 'With the permission of my father, I give my consent to my union with the Emperor Napoleon.' She thereupon desired her governess to affix the Emperor's portrait to her breast. The reserve of the Austrians contrasted with the phrases of the Bourget de Lignon, which seemed so out of place in the mouth of the conquerors. After conclusion of such formalities as the solemn renunciation of the Austrian succession, confirmation of the pragmatic sanction, and the order of succession, the oath was taken before the crucifix, followed at the Grand Theatre in presence of the Emperor and Empress, together with the Archduchess, the ambassador, and his whole suite, by a representation of Iphigenie and Olida by Gluck. The marriage contract involving delivery of the dowry of 400,000 francs in gold ducats enclosed in a coffer followed. This caused the Archbishop of Vienna to raise his timid protest, seeing that the Austrian court recognized neither the major excommunication fulminated by the Pope June 11th, 1809, nor the reservation by the Holy See in regard to annulment of marriages among sovereigns. But the certificate of the ambassador of France having been held sufficient, all was ready, and nothing remained but to proceed with the marriage. It would be solemnized on the 11th, which was a Sunday, the only day of the week in Lent, on which it was permissible to celebrate. The cortege, which was marshaled in the apartments, passed through the Augustinian cloister, draped with green cloth in order to reach the church. In order of precedence, with majestic array, the Prince of Neuchâtel preceded the archdukes, who walked 2 and 2 until the last two before the emperor was the Archduke Charles, whom Napoleon had nominated to represent himself at the nuptial ceremony. After the emperor, the empress was seen leading the fiancé. Complication arose during the ceremonial celebrated according to the ritual of Vienna in the German tongue in consequence of a stranger, who was not a king, having been admitted during the imperial banquet to the emperor's table for the first time. It was on the 13th that the Empress of the French set out on her journey, escorted in her carriage by Archduke Charles between two ranks of soldiers at a walking pace. She traversed the streets of Vienna, filled by a saddened, almost indignant crowd. The cannon thundered, the bells clashed. Marie Louise arrived at St. Polton, whither the emperor had gone with all the imperial family. There, on the 13th of the month, was held the last dinner, the last soirée. Next morning, after mass, the new empress took leave of her father. The handing over was to be accomplished at Braunau. The retinue with which Marie Louise was to arrive, after having halted on the 14th at Ems, in the palace of the Prince of Auersperg, and on the 15th at Ried, consisted of 83 carriages or wagons, together with 453 draft horses and 8 saddle horses. Besides the grand masters and the grand mistresses, there were 12 ladies of the palace, 12 chamberlains, and a detachment of the Hungarian Garter nobles. The personnel exceeded 300 dignitaries. The handing over did not actually take place at Braunau, for the town contained no suitable premises. Consequently, the engineers of the French army in occupation since 1809 had put up temporary buildings divided into 3 halls, French, neutral, and Austrian. 2 entrances led up to the building, one on the Braunau side, typifying France, and the other towards Altheim for Austria. Nothing had been omitted from its luxurious appointments, and stoves distributed an agreeable warmth through the rooms. Avenues planted with green trees gave a permanent aspect to this temporary construction. Having left Ried at 8 in the morning of the 16th, the Empress arrived at Altheim at 11, where she divested herself of her traveling garments and reached the temporary buildings at 2 o'clock. The French had been awaiting her in their halls for an hour and a half in gala costume. Having rested in the Austrian hall, she passed into the central hall, where her court assembled round her. The French court now entered and took up its position opposite the Austrian court. The acts of handing over and reception were read, and the signatures appended and sealed. The Austrian cortege took leave with tears as they kissed the hand of their archduchess, after which the Austrian commissary gave the hand of the empress to the French commissary. Caroline made her entree, embraced Marie Louise, and welcomed her. There was yet another ceremony with the Archduchess Antoine, who had been sent by the Emperor of Austria to compliment the Queen of Naples. So they took carriages for Braunau, 7 in number, that of the Empress having 8 white horses surrounded by grooms and pages on horseback, kept in the center of the cortege, which defiled between the Friant, Padon, and Pagel divisions. Amid salutes from the officers of banners, cannons firing a salvo, and trumpets sounding, they arrived at Braunau, where a palace had been constructed by breaking through the walls of 2 houses. The trousseau was exhibited by the lady of the bedchamber. Marie Louise, whose hair and dress were now arranged à la Française, received the homage of her ladies and officers of her household. Before the departure of Count von Trout Mansdorf, who had charge of the handing over. The Empress entrusted to him the last letter she was able to write freely to her father. I think of you continually, and I shall always think of you. God has given me strength to bear this last shock courageously. In him alone I place all my confidence. He will help me and will give me courage, and I shall find calm in the resolution to fulfill my duty to you, since I have made you this sacrifice. She then described her emotions at being separated from all her ladies, except Countess Lazinska, her grand mistress, whom Napoleon had promised to leave near her, and who before the end of the week would be sent back to Vienna. She mentioned the icy shudder that fell upon her, and her repugnance to the French women. Oh God, so different to the Viennese ladies. Her feeling of insecurity with regard to the Queen of Naples, to whom, however, she was astonishingly amiable. The ordeal of the 2 hours' toilette, whence she emerged as perfumed as the French women whose society during a long journey she dreaded. The discomfiture of not having yet received a letter from Napoleon. All these were recorded. Such were her thoughts at the moment when she was entering on her new life, when she was about to adopt at one and the same time a husband and the customs of a country all unknown to her and hostile alike to her pride, her race, her past, in short, to everything that mattered to her.